Hello and welcome to this video on bonsai soil compaction. Bonsai soil is not a one-size-fits-all solution. You can't just plant a tree, shrubbery or vine into any soil and expect it to lead to a bonsai. While it is true that many species can be grown in any soil, some do need more attention. This is also why a range of soil recipes exist. We previously described the range of soils you can use and how to make them. The full video can be found in the top right corner. The short version of that video is that soil is made up as either a very inorganic matter rich, a very organic matter rich, or a balanced mix. As the organic matter in your soil is converted into carbon for photosynthesis and plant growth, it is lost from the soil solution. This leads to voids and spaces. Between gravity and water flowing through the soil, these voids are filled or soil content is shifted to fill the void, thereby removing them. This will reduce the volume of your soil mix. Some of these same voids are also filled with root growth. The roots grow out to find new organic matter for growth. Over a day, a week, and even a month it makes little difference, but over a year or more it can make a lot of difference. This is why repotting is needed. You both replace the organic material and reopen room for root growth through root pruning. The phenomena of soil compaction is not a modern problem and not specific to bonsai either. It is a global issue and especially relevant to agriculture. It's fundamentally when soil particles just get too tightly packed together. In the case of bonsai, this is largely due to the reduction of organic matter. But that is not everything. You need the movement of air and water through the soil, and in turn, by doing so, you remove voids that are necessary for air and water to be retained. This will inevitably lead to problems, notably with the ability to drain the soil freely, which is especially important for bonsai, but also for the bonsai itself. Without organic matter, there is no growth, plain and simple. Whilst agricultural and environmental issues like, for example, heavy machinery aren't so relevant, other considerations are. And it comes down to the pressure in various ways. Again, most frequently you'll find that this is going to be something like water flowing through the soil. As it starts on the surface, it pushes down and will eventually work its way around all the matter that makes up the soil. But until then, it squishes it just a little bit each time, and each of these successive waterings will cause more and more of it to squish down. The same thing can be said to a certain extent with regards to gravity and it constantly pulling on the soil, at least somewhat. This will cause it to also compact, but far less significantly so than what water causes. You also have to consider things like UV light. As ironic as it is to say, with bonsai needing to be outside and preferably in some degree of sunlight, that same sunlight can cause issues, notably the breakdown of organic matter through UV light rather than the intention of breaking it down for the purposes of the bonsai to grow. The same light can have another effect, and through the combination of watering and light you get a wetting and a drying cycle. And every time the organic matter within soil goes through that cycle, you actually compact and shrink the organic matter just a little bit. As you repeat this cycle many times over, considering this is done over several years at a minimum, you also find that the inorganic matter in the material that's not organic, notably things like rock, scoria and similar, also begins to break down just a little bit, and as it breaks down it causes small fragments to free up, and this causes them to better hold together, causing the otherwise large, relatively inorganic matter to begin coming together more effectively through the effect of electrostatic attraction. The other consideration which we should mention before we get onto water itself is fertiliser. As a general rule, your bonsai needs to be fertilised regularly and at least somewhat aggressively depending on the species. Some less so than others, and some not at all, but the general rule is that most bonsai are very fertiliser hungry. The effect of fertiliser is somewhat significant when we talk about soil. And that comes down to the fact that things like phosphorus and potassium can cause some of the contents within your soil mix to begin aggregating together, and this causes a clumping effect, similar to what we observe with mineralization and small particles of inorganic matter. The difference is that this is going to affect some of the organic material as well, and this further exacerbates the issue of compaction of soil. Now we have the water itself, and watering is essential. You're not going to be able to get away from that point. And this is one reason why watering in particular ways is suggested, most notably that you only water just enough to have the soil damp, but not sodden. That is, you want it moist. If you're worried about the soil being too dry, you can absolutely soak it by, quite literally, dunking the pot in a large bucket of water and letting it become inundated with it, taking it out of said bucket and letting it drain freely. This causes those voids that are there to fill up with water completely. It also drives out the oxygen and other air that is in those voids, and then it reopens them as the water flows out, effectively drawing air back in. Repeating that process too frequently, or overwatering it too frequently, can cause the material within the soil to become sort of glue-like and come together, and it doesn't break up freely. And this means that excessive watering can lead to excess moisture, and this excess moisture leads to the soil beginning to aggregate and compact, separately to all the other issues described. The same issue with overwatering can also achieve something similar by virtue of root rot, and this is when you excessively water, the roots are effectively kept constantly moist and excessively moist at that, which then causes them to break down, and when they break down, the area that they take up isn't replaced by, well, new roots or anything else. It simply creates a void that the soil begins to fill. The areas that weren't occupied by the root may end up being occupied by new roots, but that area itself could be considered something of a dead zone. Based on this information, we've set up an experiment to show the real-world effect of soil compaction. We have 3 scenarios: organic matter rich, inorganic matter rich, and a commercial middle ground soil mix, supposedly specially made for bonsai. Each will be given the same treatment, that is, the same light, heat, water, UV, and more. The experiment will run for about a year, and based on what we've already said, we would expect the results to be no surprise, but it's also true that it might not work out as the theoretical information predicts. And not only do we have a particular setup for this that is somewhat different from bonsai pots, but also it's entirely possible that the theoretical examples given and the research on a larger scale doesn't translate quite the same way it does to a bonsai pot and soil. So we'll know exactly how accurate it is, and to a lesser extent, let's say, what impact soil compaction does indeed have on soil used for bonsai. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.